Hello, welcome to my channel where we want to explore the topic of complexity and how we can better deal with it. I hope you're all doing well. Usually the term complexity is mentioned rather on the sidelines or casually. It has a grubby child attached to it. One does not like to call a process in such a way. It does not trigger a good mood. It is associated with negativity and slowness, all attributes that run counter to our zeitgeist. Because according to the official diction, it is cheerful, positive and fast. Everything should seem simple, easily accessible. Our times are like that, fast moving, and the attention span is usually short. No one wants to give the impression that it takes a lot of thinking to get through certain processes. Do we therefore rarely take the time to question processes or to get to the bottom of them? Well, at best, therefore, a topic is merely conceptualized as complex without analyzing it further. In this way, the media can maintain integrity, but we are no smarter afterwards. And to be honest, unfortunately, most of the time, this does not even happen. In other words, the authority over what is to be perceived as complex and what is not is held by the creator of the topic. He determines, like a magician, what the viewer may and should see. If, on the other hand, we want to proceed in a self-determined manner, then we need our own knowledge about complexity. We need tools or characteristics how we can best deal with it. Because in ignorance of complexity, we bring ourselves under circumstances in great danger. To this end, we would like to devote our attention here to complexity as such. In exchange with each other, we want to look for ways to reduce complexity, not only to be able to defend ourselves better, but especially to be able to live more self-determined. I myself work in a profession that has been proven to be complex. This certainly helps when one is faced with such a situation again, but only within a very limited framework. That's why it is important to me that we try to explore together how we can better manage complexity. My previous posts have been about characteristics for complexity or the notion of situational awareness. I have explained what characterizes these features and how to achieve an accurate perception of the environment. There are the 3 steps: perception, evaluation, and anticipation. Today, we want to illuminate the meaning of knowledge about complexity, and we want to delimit when knowledge alone is no longer sufficient. First, then, we tap a situation for characteristics which, on the basis of situational awareness, poses the question, is there complexity or not? Because we ultimately want or need to avoid a threat that has the potential to negatively affect us in the short or long term. At first glance, this requirement seems overstated, doesn't it? What could possibly happen in the everyday life of our civilized society? Yes, an accident on the way to work, maybe, but otherwise, it should be easier to understand that we have to make such an assessment when we are injured or when the process of aging causes us to lose strength. Undoubtedly, the modern everyday life is, superficially in any case, less risky than it was ever before. If we think of the acquisition of food, for example, the perilous hunt of yore is in no way comparable to the convenient trip to the supermarket. On the other hand, as soon as we delve a little deeper into the processes that make up our modern life, we quickly realize that by no means everything that is convenient is also free of disadvantages for us, let alone that it is automatically capable of bringing about an improvement. For example, if we shop at the supermarket without a concept and without a planned health strategy for ourselves, we will purchase a variety of products that are harmful to us, harmful by e.g. sugar, alcohol, or harmful e-additives. We need in this respect, also with such seemingly banal processes, a lot of knowledge. Why actually? Well, the interests of the industry are not congruent with our own. For them, it is about maximizing profit. For us, it's about optimized benefit. Competition alone can theoretically resolve this conflict of goals, but only if A regulatory framework exists that sincerely gives top priority to the interests in a healthy human being, or B, by maximally empowering people, in this case in their role as consumers, to make autonomous, informed and self-determined decisions. If we consider the enormous influence of lobbyists on decision makers, or think of the increasingly poor quality of education, it seems very doubtful whether this goal is currently being achieved. 3 out of 5 characteristics of complexity are again determined by the knowledge of a situation. A. The large amount of information. The more I know about an environmental situation, the more I can counter its dangers. This includes theoretical book knowledge. This includes experienced and experiential knowledge in dealing with similar situations, i.e. the reflection of how one has already handled a situation before. So, an interest in the subject is worthwhile. B. The intransparency or milk glass effect. The more I know about a situation, the more transparent it will normally become for me, because I'm able to include contingencies. Not knowing, on the other hand, will trigger inexplicable, i.e. non-transparent processes. C. The interconnectedness. The more I know about the interconnectedness of the system I enter, the better I can deal with these intended effects beneficially. I also know better how strong my own intervention in the systems may be in order not to influence networking effects counterproductively. At this point, it must certainly be mentioned that an enormous amount of expert knowledge in a dynamic situation can have an inhibiting effect on the operation of the system. In other words, we run the risk of losing sight of the essentials. Compared to the option of too little knowledge, however, this much knowledge will, on the other hand, result in an inherently more prudent handling of the system. So, one can certainly claim better to know too much than too little. It increases our situational awareness. Knowledge, learned, acquired and experienced, thus helps us. Of course, we need time for this, and especially the motivation to take this time for such a topic. What about the remaining elements, momentum and nonlinearity? Well, momentum is not a volume term like knowledge. It denotes a vector, a force action in a certain direction, which thus has an expectability. This expectability will occur if we know about the possibilities which can produce dynamics. So knowledge is also here our foundation. This applies e.g. to the danger of avalanches as well to the effect of a fire, but also the effect of too much sugar consumption on our body. When the occurring dynamic threatens to overwhelm us is determined by our personal experience in dealing with the situation when we face it alone, or within a group by the least experienced. The chain is only as strong as its weakest link. In this respect, momentum has an effect is also a concept that we can work out in advance, because by already knowing the effect that a fragile system has, it is easier for us to imagine the effects. The requirement is to activate our imagination, to imagine situations that are characterized by dynamics that go beyond the normal. So we are challenged to give up mental comfort in the sense of this will never happen, and instead to activate a what could happen anything thinking instead. In other words, to think for ourselves instead of letting ourselves be guided only by promises or assumptions which are often deliberately manipulatively interpreted or even allowed to be interpreted by other interest groups because other objectives exist than just our well-being. How else can we explain, for example, the oversupply of sugar and alcohol in the supermarket? There remains the notion of non-linearity, the non-expectability of what happens next when we are stuck in a complex situation. Just like momentum, it is not a volume concept like knowledge. It also describes a vector, a force effect. Only non-linearity is just not expectable in its time of occurrence or its force effect. Instead of it, everything is possible at any time, in any intensity, and in any direction. So it is difficult to arm ourselves effectively against it. This makes non-linearity the most effective and strongest companion of complexity, because the situation evolves from multi-layered to chaotic, and chaotic equals uncontrollable if we do not take the appropriate preventive countermeasures. In fragile technical systems, this can mean that important components, for example, are always replaced so early that a total failure of this part is extremely unlikely, while the other, superficially cheaper option would be to let them run to the edge of their resilience and only then replace them. Similarly, escalating warning levels, for example, with floods or avalanches, should be established and designed to prevent the emergence of nonlinear chaotic effects as far in advance as possible. But also minimum velocities are, for example, defensive measures to prevent the occurrence of nonlinear effects. So prevention or limits are trumps in the fight with nonlinearity. However, one needs a wide variety of measures at the same time, while at the same time one has insufficient information about when and where they can take effect. Of course, this also raises economic evaluation questions which are often answered by the wrong experts. The example of missing flood protection measures shows it quite well. An expected momentum, with appropriate humility before nature, turned into a chaotic nonlinearity due to faulty assumptions and calculation models at the moment when the too weakly designed measures failed. Will we see a similar situation in the foreseeable future in Germany with the disconnection of inexpensive energy supplies? In my opinion, complexity is the defining challenge for all of us today. Never before has technological process been so rapid, and never before has mankind been connected in one way or another across the globe. And above all, it has probably never been more difficult than today to distinguish truth from deception, while at the same time we act in a very superficial and impulse-driven way. Therefore, it is essential that we explore this topic in its theoretical components, but also especially in its aspects that address our inner being. So we summarize. First, there is nothing like a profound knowledge to be able to perceive our environment correctly. Second, non-linearity is chaos which develops in the situation. It can be met only by a multiplicity of preventive measures. In the situation itself, we have almost no more chance. There, only luck helps us. Up to now, we have only looked at what can be observed as complexity. But what does it look like inside ourselves? What do we need there in order to best cope with complexity? Which mindset helps us? Which one hinders us? Questions like these I would like to address in the next posts. If there is something you would like illuminated, Feel free to let me know in your comments. Thanks for listening. Until next time.